Hey there, readers and storytellers, and thank you for joining me on Story Unfolding, a show about changing the world through creativity, ingenuity, and intellectual discourse. We share meaningful conversations with creators, creatives, and dreamers who take it upon themselves to make a difference in the world. We have an influence on the world around us, regardless of our intent. The only way forward is by confronting the hard truths, asking the tough questions, and letting your voice be heard. We are better together each day with our human story unfolding. Now, I am pleased to have Joshua Lindquist on with me today. Is it Joshua or Josh?
It's Josh.
Josh.
Thank you
Okay,
for asking.
Josh
Yeah.
Lindquist. Okay, I want to make sure I got that correct. So, Josh Lindquist is a writer, film, and television producer and actor. He grew up in Colorado Springs, Colorado, and has spent most of his adult life split between living in Colorado and Los Angeles, California. He served in the U.S. Army Reserves from 2013 to 2016 and graduated from the University of Colorado in Boulder. He writes fantasy and science fiction primarily. He also loves being on set and working in film and television production. He has two cats, Russ and Haru.
Yep.
Uh,
They'll
Haru, all
probably
right. And I
make a
think,
cameo here at some point.
yeah, I
They
think
can
I
see
saw
I'm
one
doing
earlier.
something,
So
so they're running all around. Yeah.
awesome. Awesome. Well, Josh, thanks for joining us today. And I know I just read your intro, but why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, first off, Michael, thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy to be here. Really appreciate your time, and I really love the interview questions that we did for the written segments. So I'm really excited to jump into the video one. But um, I think that summary kind of covers it. Ever since I was really young, I just always been interested in like storytelling. And from an early age, that took the form of it was creative writing when I was younger, and then my parents gave me a camera one year, and so then it became making videos with my friends in the neighborhood and stuff. Messing around, doing skits and stuff like that. So. I think very early on, writing kind of took a back seat to filmmaking. Um, but then as I got older, I always wanted to get more into the writing. And so I was one of those where I would always start ideas and never finish them.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the pandemic rolled around, I was like, I have no excuses now. So I started changing my approach and kind of striving for a complete first draft and then going back and editing, as opposed to getting stuck after a little bit of work and just constantly re-editing and putting myself into a vicious cycle. So that was when I actually started, finishing books and finishing screenplays. And so it's been really great since then. So, like I said, I've been dabbling in making videos and skits and YouTube videos and stuff like that since I was a kid. But my writing really started in 2020, which is really cool. So it's been a fun
That's
couple of
awesome.
years.
Well,
Yeah.
let's touch on both for sure, because I'm interested in both of your encounters or the things you work on projects. But I got Galgathor's, right? Did I say it right?
Yep,
Gambit.
Galgathar's Gambit right here with a
Yeah,
cover
right.
art by my buddy Will Shaw, and anyone who likes his artwork can find him. It's at Will Shaw Art on Instagram, and Shaw is SHAW, and he did my cover there because when I first finished the book, it was really soon after my first book, Exile into Sand. I
Hmm.
kind of wrote them simultaneously because they're not really connected in any way. So I was kind of working on both at the same time. So I published Galgathor's Gambit. I think it was like 2 or 3 months after I finished Exile into Sand, and so I designed my own cover very hastily because I was excited to get the book out there. And my buddy Will Shaw, who's a really good artist, he contacted me and was like, "Hey, so I'm sure your book's great, but your cover that you made is terrible. So let me do one for you." And he made this awesome cover instead, which is so much better than what I had initially. So that was really fun. So that's
That's
my
awesome.
little
Yeah, I do
cover
love the
story.
cover.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, yeah, he
So
did a really
tell us
great
a little
job.
bit. Is this is your second book, or how many books have you
Correct.
put out?
Um, So I guess technically it's my third. I co-wrote a post-apocalypse novel with a
Okay.
friend in high school. That was one thing that we did finish back in the day, and we self-published right when self-publishing first became a thing on Amazon. So I think that's still there, but I haven't visited that. So I think it was like our senior year of high school we put that out. So I'm sure it's not excellent. But no, I've done two solo books now, and I'm working on my third. But Galgathor's Gambit is my second one. So.
That's awesome. Cool. Well, how about you tell us a little bit about the book? What is it about?
So Thors Gambit, it started out as a story I had where I was trying to think of like what would be like the most epic adventure I could kind of think of the premise for like a Dungeons and Dragons game. And then from there, I kind of started trying to think of the most interesting characters that I haven't seen. Oh, there's one of my cats making a little cameo. Um, I try to start thinking of characters that we don't really see too much in fantasy that are just kind of outside of the box and not your, typical hero who's just kind of, I just wanted to have interesting characters. I think some of the characters I pulled a lot from people I've met in real life around that time, and I just kind of wanted to explore how they would all deal with being framed for murder and uncovering like this nefarious cult operating in the shadows, trying to seize power in the region, and how those characters would all deal with it. Um, so that's really the premise of the story. Is it starts out with three strangers in a city who all wake up in the town dungeons, and they've all been framed for murder, but it all feels very hasty and obvious. So instead of being, punished, they just get kind of exiled from the city. And they're like, hey, like, these people are dead. Like, we can't let you stay in the city, but we're not going to we're just going to exile you. And if you can prove your innocence in the future, then we're good. So the characters kind of start out initially getting to know each other and trying to work to just kind of show that, hey, we didn't do this. And then as they slowly uncover that there's something more nefarious going on, they start making other allies and really, putting their safety on the line to like thwart this cult that's seeking out this ancient forbidden magic. And so it's just a fun adventure story.
That sounds awesome. I love the name. I'm a big chess player, so that was the
Oh,
first
nice.
thing that caught me, the Gambit.
Oh yeah.
What is it? Is there any reason why you chose that name?
It kind of came about. Actually, I'm trying to remember how I came up with the name. Galgathor was just one of the characters I had very early on. Um, and I don't want to give too much away because he's not one of the protagonists that we're initially going on the adventure with. He's someone they find out about who's kind of a mastermind.
Hmm.
So it just kind of came to me one day where I was like, "Oh yeah, Galgathor's Gambit.
Okay.
That's a cool title." And so now I have some outline plans for a possible sequel, and I'm trying to think of a cool alliterative title for that one, and I haven't thought of anything so far, but hopefully it'll come to me eventually.
That's awesome. So now, how is you said you wrote this book and your other book simultaneously? Are they similar in terms of adventure stories, fantasy, or anything, or are they different? How do they compare?
Well, they're both fantasy stories, and I guess technically they both take place in kind of the same fictional world I've created, but they're on totally different continents. So there's really no crossover in terms of like characters or settings or plot themes at all, really. But I guess both books do have similar themes they explore of. And again, I totally came up with both stories very independently of each other. But when I think about them, um, the first book is really the Exile into Sand is about one character, and it kind of is almost a parallel of my own journey with religion in the past,
Mhm.
and kind of exploring ideas of um, how people use religion to relate to the world around them and all of the various benefits and harms that can have. So it explores all those themes, and then Galgathor's Gambit is much more. I mean, I try to be in depth with my characters, but it's much more of an ensemble cast.
Mhm.
There's really six primary characters, and it kind of switches between their points of view. So that was the major difference. But there, Galgathor's Gambit ends up examining more different characters' ideas of who they are and who they should be, and then how they kind of merge those two concepts as they
Okay.
step up to take care of um, a situation that's unfolding in the region that they're from. But I realize in both books, the end threat does end up being people pursuing religious extremism to some degree and seeking power to control others and kind of having to deal with that toxicity there. So it didn't really occur to me till I was like midway through both books. I was like, oh, I guess you kind of have the same existential threat that the characters are facing, but um, the main difference is that the first book, Exile into Sand, is very focused on one protagonist,
Hmm.
and Galgathor's Gambit is more of an ensemble cast.
So yeah, your touch on religious extremism. I know if you're reading the background behind me, I came up with this. I try and come up with nifty titles for each episode, and it's after I read through. So we did a written portion beforehand that's available on michaelcamarillo.books.com. And it was your answers were fantastic. They're fascinating. And that was kind of the general theme that you talked about. We're talking about, making a social difference and how our works influence the world. And you talked about religious extremism, greed, and what was the other one? It's behind me, but I can't read it.
Intolerance of others, yeah.
Intolerance, yes. So yeah,
Well,
we're gonna dig into those. Before I forget, though, I want to touch on Exile. So both of your
yes.
books touch
Okay.
on Exile. So
Exile.
how did that happen to come about?
That's a great question, actually. So I got Exile into Sand right there. That's my first book.
Awesome.
But yeah, I get the first book really examines exile a lot, whereas Galgathor's Gambit, I guess I didn't think about it, but yeah, the main three characters do get exiled at the very beginning, but then um, very quickly the focus shifts onto them more going on like this mission that gets increasingly dangerous and more cumbersome as they get deeper into the whole situation. So the focus isn't so much on exile, but I guess if I had to answer, I'd say that at times throughout my life, I've felt like I haven't always fit in. And so I guess that theme of exile is something that I do explore in my creative works of how to overcome that, how to look and really see if you're not fitting into a situation or if that's just maybe, self-criticism or over analysis of a situation, So, but
That's
yeah,
really cool.
I hadn't thought of that. Oh yeah, both books do deal with exile, so I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, I was looking at your website and I read into your story, and your background. And we've talked a couple times. I know I was on your show before.
Yeah,
And yeah, that was just something that it kind of falls in line with the concept of my show that, your words have an influence on others, even if that's not something you intended. So I immediately gravitated toward Exile. I've had a similar existential journey in my life with religion and finding that where I fit in and place, and that kind of underscores my storytelling and my writings as well, finding that purpose and meaning.
totally.
So yeah, just that comparison of your two stories having exile as a component, I just found that really intriguing, that you just fell into that. But I'm curious, like, how has your lived experience influenced the way you write in your storytelling? So I know you talked already about the religious journey that you've had.
Yeah,
Is there anything else? I know you were in the military, you've had a whole bunch of experiences. Like, could you expand on that a little bit?
totally. I think with any writer that stuff from your personal life that had an impact on you is going to end up seeping into your work one way or another. And so, yeah, I guess, you know, uh, going through ROTC and then commissioning into the reserves, I did spend a lot of time um, in my young adult life thinking about the nature of the kind of big concepts you think about in regards to like duty and like um being a good citizen or standing up for what's right. And um I think at the time too, I mean, because I started ROTC when I was 18 and I'd done junior ROTC before that. So um it's very easy to get swept up in this social idea of, oh, being in the military is like it gets very a lot of the stuff you go through is difficult, so you end up getting really close to the people that you're in with, and that's awesome. I made some amazing relationships with people in the military, but I think it can also lead to some insular thinking and kind of this, you almost get an us versus them mentality of like people who aren't in the military.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm really glad that I quickly saw through that once I was in the reserves and kind of starting to get out of the military, where I was like, oh, I've been kind of living in a weird little military bubble for a couple of years now. And ironically, that kind of coincided with when I was kind of getting into a bubble with religion as well, because I think that's a big part of my lived experience is that I grew up in a religious household, and it was something that was always there and always something that I identified with, but it didn't mean much to me. And then when I first left home and went to college and I was doing army stuff, and I had some medical issues and some stresses in that first year, and so I really turned to religion as a way to cope with it. And I ended up taking it very seriously, and I think it was ultimately a maladaptive coping skill. And so after a couple years, I kind of re-examined that and became an atheist like I am now. And so yeah, that was an important journey that's informed a lot of my world outlook. And so I think that's kind of like just a big, in a nutshell, you know,
Yeah.
life
Yeah,
history
no,
that kind of
that's
played
a
into it,
that's a
yeah.
huge yeah, that's a huge topic that you touch on, the insular thinking, and that's something I experienced as well. My wife and I were both in, and we have, tried to depart as much as possible. Like that, we value it, like you say, we have a lot of
Yeah.
great relationships. There's a lot of
Yeah.
great experiences. There's good things about it, but there's, as with everything, there's two sides of the coin.
Yeah.
And I think, it's interesting because you're talking about religion in conjunction with your journey through the military. And I found when I was in that the two were very close connected. Like it was,
They
you would
are.
be hard pressed to find, you know, practicing atheists, open atheists in the
Yeah.
military. I mean,
Yeah.
it's written on your dog tag from basic training,
Yep.
they tell you like, what's your religious preference? And I know for mine, it had Roman Catholic on there because that's the way I was raised, but I'm
Yeah.
agnostic. I don't, it's just not in basic training. It became kind of a thing that like that was your only day of rest, right? To go
Oh
to
yeah.
church, go
Totally.
to church, and
And
you could go get away
that
from
was,
everything.
thankfully, that was when my shift started, was when I was in junior ROTC for 4 years and then ROTC for 4 years. Like you said, it was a very, all denominations of Christianity and Catholicism primarily. And then when I joined the reserves, my unit was the only unit in the Army that had two Buddhist monk chaplains attached to us that were actually these awesome guys from Thailand who were like legit monks who came over and commissioned, and they were the only two Buddhist chaplains in the Army, is what I heard. And so every Sunday when we were training, I would get to go to their Buddhist service, and it was super
Oh, what
cool. And so
cool.
that helped me kind of start breaking out of that thinking and start thinking about, and there's other alternatives and stuff, and it helped me explore other ideas. So I was really fortunate in that regard. But no, I think like you totally said, like when I was in ROTC, it was, you were hard pressed to find someone who wasn't, you know, Christian or Catholic. It was very few atheists and stuff like
Yeah.
that.
So I
So
think what I'm inferring from this just conversation right now, and I want to try and draw back to some of your characters a little bit, but um, is this search for purpose? This idea
yeah,
that we are always looking for meaning in the world, and that's just kind of a human trait that we all share. And people find it in different ways. And I was actually talking to someone. I work a side gig at a baseball field right now, and I was talking to a lady who's really interested in my book, but I had to give her the disclaimer, like, oh, hey, you say you're a Christian, like, just want to let you know, mine's very, like I harp on a lot of religions.
yeah,
And we had a conversation that, like, hey, purpose and meaning is our own thing. Whatever it is
yeah,
we choose to believe is our thing, and that's our choice to have. And we were talking about how, baseball for some people is a religion. For people, some
yeah,
people, the rituals, the creeds, the community in that sport is something that gives people meaning to go on. And I feel like
yeah,
that's something that the military tends to do as well. It gives you this idea, this perception of the world and yourself and your community
mhm,
that really draws people in. And there's so many ways of doing that. And I'm not giving a critique on one or the other, but I want to draw that back to your stories about the religious extremism and how some of your characters felt this, went into exile, were separated, and you say that religious extremism come into it, so with power and all that. So
yeah.
how do your characters break away from that,
Well,
or
I
do they?
think they do, and I think that it does kind of mirror the way I broke away from it, because I think you absolutely hit the nail on the head, where like I mean, especially in the army. I mean, I was an intel guy, so I rode a desk my whole career. I never deployed or anything, but still, even when you're in ROTC, when you're still a cadet, they have you thinking a lot and like working through hypothetically a lot of life or death situations. So that idea of purpose really comes up very strongly. And I think that's why, religion deals a lot with people trying to find their meaning. Oh, there's one of my cats. Hey, Haru, watch the camera. uh, yeah, he figured out how to knock the camera down recently, and it's been a problem for Zoom interviews. But so hopefully he won't do that here. But no, like I was saying though, I think that like you said, purpose is something that every person has to grapple with in life. Um, and I think a lot of systems that we've designed as humans help us on that journey. So you've got military, you've got government systems, you've got religious systems, different social groups, and like you said, sports even are ways that people find this meaning and purpose and ritual and comfort and community. And so for me, it really became examining my own values and what I think is important. And that's helped me find my purpose. And like, I think when I started, yeah, I think I've always gotten better at it the older I've gotten and the more lived experience I've had, just the more places I've been, the more people I've met, the more different, circumstances and work environments I've been in just kind of are constantly expanding me as a person. But it was around the time that I started writing these books during the pandemic that I did start doing some really um like what's the word I'm trying to think of, just like concentrated and like explicit like self-reflection and saying, let me list out my values and not just have like 6 or 7 vague things, but I was going for like 20 things and really
Mhm.
trying to examine what things are important to me. And that just kind of gave me a good lens of what my purpose is. And I really like the questions you asked in the written interview. I hope people go and check that out on your website because I really liked those questions and I really liked the introspection that they prompted from me. And that was really cool for me to really sit and think about like, okay, if I can in my books examine like, because obviously I think one of my values, and I think that one that a lot of people share is like the sanctity of individual life and like freedom and stuff. And
Mhm.
so it forced me to think about like what are the biggest threats to those? And I think that's the title of the episode right there. Extremism, intolerance of people who are different, and like greed. Those are the three biggest broad categories of things that undermine the freedom and sanctity of life that so many of us want to see more of in the world.
Yeah. So now expand a little bit more on that. Why do you think those three things are the biggest problem? And like, how would you kind of broaden on those?
I
Like,
mean,
define
I
them.
think they're the three I see the most in America currently. And so, I really want to travel internationally more. That's been a goal of mine the last couple of years, and of course, the pandemic made that very difficult. So, and now just me trying to find the time and extra money to do so is making it difficult. But I really want to see more of the world and see if that is a constant thing. But from what I've seen in America so far, I think those are the three big ones because I think that the economic and political systems we've built really encourage greed in a toxic way. And I don't want to jump down that tangent too much, but I just
Oh,
become
that's okay.
I've become very jaded with the current way we have capitalism going on right now. I think it's again, I don't have all the answers. I'm not an economics major, but I think the current system we have just isn't working. If you look at the inequalities and the pay disparities and the wage gaps and stuff, it's clearly not working. And you have some, I know so many people who are that again they almost worship the idea of capitalism, and I'm like, hey, like, why don't we explore other variations of it? Or I mean, there's certain industries like healthcare where the whole idea of supply and demand breaks down because the demand is fixed. Everyone's going to need healthcare at some point. So when
Yeah.
you're trying to do it like, I mean, if we sit and pull up some random commodity of like, oh, coffee, like, okay, there's a certain amount of demand, and if the supply changes and the price changes, the demand will fluctuate. But that model doesn't apply accurately to healthcare. So having the same unregulated rules just isn't working. So I've just been talking to friends recently about that, who they're even more dialed in with research and statistics and alternate ideas. And I'm like, yeah, you guys are right. Like, I think so many people in America, if they happen to be in a situation where they're doing really well financially, just the way the system is, it makes people stop caring about all the people who aren't doing well. And I think that's kind of a toxic,
It
myopic
is.
thing that happens, And then,
Yeah.
I've just noticed I've seen, especially on the internet, a lot of intolerance of people who are different, and just a lack of empathy, and just I don't know. I don't know how
It,
people can go be about in the real world and not realize that, like, the cool thing about humanity is that, like, individuals can differ so much, and there's so much diversity out there of every facet of humanity, and yet at the end of the day, we all want the same things. We all want safety, fulfillment, love, acceptance. So it's like, at the core, we're all the same, but not to the point that we're boring, because there's so much cool diversity out there. And I think that's the best part about humanity. But so many people don't see it that way, and it's very confusing and frustrating to me. And so that's something I try to challenge in my books, of like, people with really, really different surface level things about them coming together and realizing, oh, we actually have the important things in common. Let's work together to make the world a better place. So that's a theme I like to show a lot of my books, and my
that's
screenplays too.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's amazing. I think you definitely hit it right on the head, about the divisiveness in the world. I mean, especially in America right now, it's rough. And I have been, so I can give you a little bit of that kind of lens into the international travel, because I've been to 31 countries. I've been all over the
It's
world. That's
awesome.
part of huge part of my family. It is everywhere.
Yeah.
It's not just America. America is pretty bad off right now. I think we're struggling
Yeah.
a lot. But it isn't a regional thing. It is a global problem. And I know I did experience how I was in Mexico for 2 months this past summer. And the difference economically is so huge. And I'm from Texas, and the mentality of this border war going on that really isn't there. It's this perception of us versus them mentality, and there's so many things that are wrong with that. And when I went over across the border, I expected, everyone had put into my mind that, Mexico is dangerous. There's all these problems, all that, like, so much crime and everything. It was a wonderful place. I told my parents, like, the people there were nicer than anyone I've met in America. And
Absolutely.
even knowing that I didn't speak Spanish very well, like, it was very hard to communicate, people were receptive to me. They were embracing, they were accepting that, I wasn't from there, they were
Yeah.
helpful, they were kind, and it was just a completely different perspective. At the same time, you saw those segments in the society itself. So while they accepted me as a foreigner and I felt at home there, you could see just from kind of standing off, you saw where there was breakdowns in that society, and then economically speaking, it was so much different than America. And to see that people were okay living in these kind of these circumstances where money was not a a common commodity. It was not something that's just normal.
Yeah.
It was eye opening for me. So it is
Yeah.
definitely, I think that greed component is something that's very prevalent and causing a lot of problems in the world.
Yeah.
Same with
Well,
intolerance.
I think that kind of is a really good segue into something I just thought of just now as you said that, because that's really fascinating. That I think that there's so many different forms of government and economic organization and just cultures and communities, that, like, I think people shouldn't be so afraid to try new things, because, like, again, I think, at least from what I've seen in a lot of places in America, in my experience, a lot of people get very entrenched in the way that they think things are or should be, and they're very afraid of change. And like you said, though, like you went to an environment that was really different, but you felt really accepted, and like you saw things there that weren't ideal, and you saw opportunities for improvement, but it was still vastly different. So like, I don't know, that gives me hope that like there's other ways of doing things out there that we can explore and maybe be doing better than we are now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's slowly growing, and I think that's why, people like you and me, we need to people who are influencers, writers who are, watching this, other creators, like we have a responsibility to, talk about these issues, not just
Yeah.
promote ourselves, not just promote our book and try and sell it and feed into this capitalism world. Like
Right.
we're writing for a reason. We're trying to, find our purpose, find our voice, and express what is important to us. And there's a reason for that. So I think we
Yeah.
need to dig deeper and have those conversations. And it's not just about selling your book, like that's what I
No. Yeah.
think. For me, my sales are not where I had hoped. I'm not making a lot at all. But
Same here.
it's
but
the
but
people that have
I
given
feel
me
good about
feedback.
what I've written, and like,
Exactly.
yeah, and like people who have been like affected by reading the book and are like, I really resonated with that character's journey or that element of the story. That makes it all worth it, So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Now we are running short on time, but I want to touch on one thing because I know religion is a very contentious topic. So if they see,
Yep.
we're talking about religious extremism, here you're an atheist, I'm an agnostic. They're thinking, oh, we're just attacking you. So I know from my experience that religion is a beautiful thing. I love studying it as an academic. I
Mhm.
think I practice with my daughter. I let her explore all the religions. We have
That's
practiced
awesome.
Ramadan in this house. We have done Yom Kippur. We've done everything because I want her to be immersed in everything and experience it. So, what is your stance on where is that line that religion can
Mhm.
be good and beneficial to society as opposed to the extremist problem that you're talking about?
That's a really great question, because I do think that, at least personally, I got to admit, I do tend to focus on the negative aspects a lot of time, because I think that when religion does start having toxic elements or extreme elements, those are the ones that really bubble to the surface, where you're reading news articles about someone saying or doing something and tying it to their religion, and you go, oh, that's messed up, But
Yeah.
I'm really glad you brought that up, because I think that there are a lot of psychological and social and cultural positives to religion that people like me who are wary of the toxic elements don't give enough credit where credit's due. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because um yeah, that's something that we can't negate or ignore, is that there are I mean, if there weren't positive elements, why do so many people still do it?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Exactly.
there are positive elements, and so I think that it's really important to dig deep into that, and that's something I want to do in the future, because like I said, I totally admit that I tend to fixate on the negatives and the areas for improvement. And so if we look
Kind
at
of human nature, right? We do
it
that.
totally is. Yeah, if something's working, you're like, cool, I'm going to ignore that. Let me focus on the parts that are wrong and not working, So
Yeah.
I think looking at it as a whole, so that we can separate the toxic from the beneficial, keep one and work to improve the other. I think that's really
I
important to
think
look at it holistically.
Yeah, for me, I think where I draw the line is when a belief creates intolerant people.
Right.
So I think for me, that is the biggest line. So you can believe whatever you want in the world. You can say your God is this, your purpose is this, whatever it is. But when you decide that that gives you the justification to mistreat others and
Yeah,
subjugate others, like that's where it's not okay. So
completely
for me,
agree.
that's a personal thing, and that's something I teach my daughter that anyone can believe whatever they want, and it's a beautiful thing. And I was an
Mhm.
archaeology major, so I love
Oh, that's
studying
cool.
how societies in the past have developed meaning and purpose for like massive geological and weather patterns and things like that, and they've
That's so
created, like,
cool.
I like drawing those analogies to gods and religions and everything. It's beautiful. I mean, I think it's a testament to the human imagination. um
Absolutely.
but as long as we are accepting of others,
Yeah.
all things are fair.
I agree. Well, that's one of the reasons I love to explore fantasy or religion in the lens of a fantasy story, because that way, you're building up a fictional religion, and that way you can really highlight the elements of what's beneficial and what's toxic, because it's all tied to fiction. Whereas when you're looking at real life religions, as you said, there's so much archaeology and history and different uh, cultures interacting and different like events impacting those religions, and like they morph over time, almost the same way languages morph over time. So there's so much extra nuance that's required when you're discussing the elements of like a real world religion. So it's really cool in a fantasy book to be able to look at the individual elements, because you're able to create it and keep it a little more, I guess, allegorical or a little bit simplified for the sake of argument or
Yeah.
exploration. So that's something I think that's one of the reasons I gravitate towards fantasy, is that it's easier to explore these really complex topics.
That's fantastic. Now we are very short on time, so we're gonna have to cut this
Yes.
out, and I'm gonna invite you to another episode. I would love to
I
have
would
you
love
because
to.
I want to talk about your TV and film production, and we did not have time today.
That's
So
okay.
please, before we end it today, tell everyone how we can find you.
If you just search my name, Josh Lindquist, pretty much on every social media, but you can find me on Amazon, Josh Lindquist. Last name is Lindquist, and if you search my name on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, I'm on all of those, so you can connect with me on there.
Awesome.
Oh,
Well,
and
thank you
YouTube as
so
well. Yeah.
Oh yeah, YouTube. All right, and all those links will be located down below. If you liked what you heard today, click subscribe. We have a whole bunch of other interviews. I'll have Josh on here again. And as we mentioned over at michaelcanreobooks.com/Joshua Lindquist, you'll see that written interview, and we dig into some very deep topics. So I'd love you to go check that out. Thanks again, Josh, for having us. And
Thank you so much for having me. This was great.
yes, wonderful. I can't wait to have you again. Everyone listening, read more and write mindfully.